Hello folks, I'm Trev Makes It Easy, the channel where we make learning easy. In this series, Trev on Econ, I'll be taking you through topics you're likely to run into in any introductory course in economics at the college or university level. My goal is to make economics less scary, more approachable, and, if I can, mildly enjoyable. With that being said, let's make it easy. All right, folks, let's get started. It's been a while, but we're back here, new year, and today we're going to be talking about probably one of the more important topics, especially just in our day-to-day lives, and that is inflation. So inflation is a big topic. It's definitely one that we're seeing in the news all the more often, and I think it's important to understand what inflation is and lay out some of the sort of general story of inflation. In this video, we're going to do just that. And then heading into the next video, we'll get a little more precise with how we calculate inflation and treat inflation here in Canada and also other parts of the world. So let's start off with a very simple thing, and that is that price levels and inflation are not the same. Okay? Price levels are what we call a price for a group of goods. All right? We'll call it an average, I'm going to say average in quotes, price for a basket of goods and services. Essentially meaning that we are going to collect some amount of goods and services in a basket, which is a fancy name for a group, and we're going to take an average of those prices. Now, this is technically a weighted average, and there's some statistical methods you could apply to it, but this is effectively telling us what is this thing worth. Okay, if I want to buy this set of things, what is sort of the price level I would expect of it? Inflation, on the other hand, is the percentage change in price levels. So 1 year, my price level might be 100, and in another year, it's 112. Well, the inflation would basically take the percentage change of that, we'll talk about the calculation later, and tell me, oh, prices have gone up 12%. Okay, there's been an increase. Now, the thing to understand here is that inflation isn't just one price going up. It's a collection of prices. All right. Inflation is not like, oh, I go to the store and milk is up. Oh, that's inflation. No, it's I go to the grocery store and I look around and I see a lot of different things going up. It's a collection of things going up, not just one thing or going up or down. It's really important to give sort of that holistic, or like I said before, basket view of goods. Now, true inflation tends to reach out and raise the prices of many goods and services. Okay. Don't get me wrong, sometimes industries will be affected. All right. If let's take airplanes, for example. Maybe the metal that goes into making propellers has gone up, so there is inflation for that specific good. Now, that's its price going up, but we would probably hesitate to use the standard word inflation because it's so targeted. That's probably not going to bleed into a bunch of different areas of the economy. It could, but realistically, it probably doesn't. Now, what that means is that inflation is something we have to care about. It is going to have an impact on all our lives. And if you've been to the grocery store lately, pretty much anywhere in the world, you will have felt this pressure. All right. So that's what inflation is. It's a percentage change in price levels, usually going up. There's some different names we use when it's going in different directions. The next question becomes, well, what's causing this? Okay. And this is a little tricky, but there's basically three reasons we talk about in general for inflation. So we say there's three causes of inflation. The names will kind of give them away, which is handy, especially if you're preparing for a test or something. The first one is called demand pull inflation. And effectively what this is as the name states, it's the demand for a good or service that's pulling the price up. All right. Effectively what happened is demand is going to increase and force prices up. Now, we can actually go back to way before when we talked about supply and demand And you will hopefully remember that we made little graphs like this. There's my demand. There's my supply. And they basically said, okay, we agree that this is the price it should be, P1. Save that for later. Well, demand pull inflation is just us adjusting this graph. If I take my demand curve and increase it, again, go back way back to demand supply lectures, there was a bunch of things that would shift demand. But if demand shifts to the right, all of a sudden, we get the situation of inflation, where now my price at equilibrium has gone up, P2, right? So this is just something becomes popular or people want something more for some reason, and that's going to cause prices to go up because there's more people competing to try and get those goods. And when you're competing on a good, guess what happens? You start to have to offer a higher and higher price to get the thing you want. The second one, kind of in a similar vein, is called cost push inflation. This is just the opposite. Instead of demand going too high, it's costs in production increasing, causing producers to lower supply and raise price. So it's kind of just an opposite way of getting the price to go higher in the supply and demand graph. So in this case, it's the producers themselves, maybe somewhere in the production supply chain, they're being faced with higher prices. Maybe the price of oil has gone up, or steel, or natural gas, whatever the case may be, and that's causing their prices to rise. Again, if we go back to our demand and supply videos, one of the things that causes supply to shift is cost of inputs, which is kind of what we're dealing with here. So again, we can use our graph to basically illustrate that. We have our supply curve, which is just there. And then as costs increase, they can't make as much because they can't buy as much material and they can't turn as much of that material into finished product. So the supply starts to do this, right? And again, we end up with a similar outcome where that price has risen, right? This is a pretty common one. This one is hard to avoid because it kind of just bleeds through the entire supply chain until it gets to the end customer, which is you and I. But it is a problem, right? And both of these things are different ways that we can basically influence the price. The first one being too much people chasing a limited number of goods, and that's forcing the price up. That's demand pull. And then cost push is there's just less goods to chase, so we're all just chasing less goods. So again, the same idea, it's going to just push prices up. The final one is an interesting one, and it dives into something that you're going to see a lot in economics, especially macroeconomics. This is built in, sometimes it's called, or expectations-based inflation. This one's a little surreal to talk about because it's almost psychological. In economics, we have something called self-fulfilling prophecy, where we have beliefs or expectations, and we tend to act as if we're right. So if I think prices are going to go up, I act like prices are going to go up. And this is important because when we act like something is going to happen, we usually end up making it happen. So to put this into perspective, what's happening is people expect prices to rise or their wages to rise, and this leads to actual inflation. Now, we don't have to worry too much about drawing this one out, but we can illustrate this in sort of a verbal example. Let's say this year, I think I did a pretty good job at my job, okay? I taught really well this year. I go to my boss and say, I think I deserve a 4% raise, okay? Well, maybe that's above what inflation was going to be. Maybe that inflation was going to be 2%, but I'm asking for 4%. So in my own little way, I'm preparing for higher costs by getting more money. And in my little world, I'm actually pushing how much I'm going to spend up potentially. I'm having a small impact on the company because now they have to allocate more funds to paying me. I've also made it so that might now require the price of the thing we sell to go higher. And if that's just me doing it, it's probably not a big deal. But if collectively a bunch of us start bidding our wages higher or expecting prices to go higher, we're going to inevitably cause that ripple effect to lead to prices going higher. This is a really interesting thing and a really difficult thing to kind of wrap your head around, but we're going to discuss it again at the end of the video when we talk about why some inflation is actually good, because there's a self-fulfilling prophecy that can be very, very scary. All right. So these are our 3 methods. Next up is going to sound obvious, but we should talk about why is inflation a problem? Okay. Why is inflation a problem? Basically, why do we even care? Because yeah, prices go up, that's bad, but it kind of depends on other factors. So the first big one, and this is kind of the, I guess, obvious one, is it reduces purchasing power, which is a very fancy way of saying how much we can buy with our dollars or whatever currency you use in your country. All right. So for example, if I have $100, maybe I can buy X amount of things this year. Well, when inflation occurs, if I still have $100, then next year my $100 buys less than that old amount. So I'm not actually poorer because I'm still having my $100, but I feel poorer. My $100 just doesn't get me as much as it used to. This is a huge problem for one big reason. And it's because this is a problem because wages are slower to adjust than prices. Okay. If our wages kept up, this would be fine, right? If inflation went up 2% and my pay went up 2% and it kind of matched perfectly, that would be awesome. Then I really wouldn't have to worry because I would perfectly have the same amount of money, right? The problem is that doesn't happen. There's various reasons for this, but basically there are different contracts, obligations, union agreements that keep wages from rising maybe as quickly or as commonly as they need to. If we lived in a more adaptive society where your price and wage could adjust kind of simultaneously, this might not be as big of an issue, but that would also mean sometimes our pay goes down, which we are very, very adverse to. All right, we might talk about that later in another video. But this purchasing power loss is a big one. The other big one is just creates a lot of uncertainty when inflation is not expected. Okay. We talked about expectations already and the idea that, well, expectations are something we all have. All right. We all have them, whether they're right or wrong. We believe they're right. Otherwise, we would just change them. And there's going to be a certain level of inflation that we expect to see. Now, the problem is what happens when it goes beyond our expectations? So in Canada, it's pretty reasonable to assume 2% inflation. We have lots of reasons for that we might get to later. But let's say next year it goes up 5%. Well, then there's 3 extra percentage of inflation that I wasn't ready for, that I now have to adjust and adapt all my life to basically compensate for. Now, this is not a huge deal, but if I'm dealing with large sums of money or projecting my company out several years, it's a lot easier if I have an idea of what the price is going to be. If you tell me that next year it's 2% and 2% and 2% every year over year, I can prepare for that. But if you all of a sudden say next year it's -5, then it's +20, then it's +30, then -10, my business is going to have a hell of a time living through that because I'm not able to prepare for all those rapid swings. All right. So We like a little bit of certainty because as soon as we enter uncertain territory, that's when mistakes happen. And mistakes can cost people a lot of money. All right. The final thing is a weird one, but it distorts saving and investment decisions. Okay. Whether you save or invest or borrow money or what have you is very relative to what we expect prices to do. For example, if I borrow money today and agree to a payment schedule, if prices rise a whole bunch, that's great for me because I'm paying that same dollar amount even though prices have gone up and my payments probably should have gone up. So borrowers might benefit and lenders might suffer. You might also see the opposite, where if inflation goes down, then the borrower is locked in to this higher payment and the lender's like, sweet, I'm getting more money than I kind of expected. We can quickly show this one because I think it's worth discussing, and I've seen some courses really like this. But here's the gist. Borrowers benefit when inflation rises. Lenders benefit with inflation falls. Oh, when, sorry, not with. When. And we can kind of illustrate this just quickly. Okay, so let's say borrower is supposed to pay $100. Okay, but prices rise so that they should have paid $150. Well, since they're still here, the borrower is getting a deal. They basically save $50, which means the lender loses. But in the opposite case, if I have the borrower, and again, they're spending $100 or they're forced to pay $100, if prices drop and they should have only been paying 90, well, then the borrower is going to be the loser here and the lender wins because they're getting more money than they should have. So we run into this issue of, do I borrow money? Do I lend money? It's hard to say, and it involves some level of prediction as to what is going to happen with the markets. What's going to happen with inflation? Is it going to get higher, lower? Which side of that transaction do I want to be on? All right. We're going to wrap this up with kind of a strange idea for a lot of people, especially if it's your first time in economics. But the last part is going to be about why low, stable inflation is good. Okay. This seems odd. A lot of us would love if prices dropped. Okay. And that is a short-sighted idea, we'll say. Okay. So the first thing is kind of counterpoint to what we said earlier. It gives us some predictability. Okay. We like when I can say, oh, inflation is probably, not always, probably going to be, let's say, 2% here in Canada. All right. In Canada, we target 2% inflation. So if I'm a business in Canada, I can reasonably safely say, I think next year will be around 2%. Now, will it for sure? No, but Bank of Canada has done a pretty good job at keeping it around 2% since they started doing it. Okay. The other one is economic stability. All right. There's a lot of efficiency gained by not having to constantly adapt to changing prices, especially high changing prices. It also means we're probably going to be able to grow a little bit. All right. It is nearly impossible to grow without some level of inflation occurring. So we like a little inflation because that means there must be some growth happening. And that's great for our economy and its general stability and competitiveness. Now the really weird one. It avoids deflation, lowering of prices, which is much worse. Okay. This is the one that always gets people, especially if I'm having a casual conversation with someone who maybe doesn't know much about economics. The idea of prices going down being a bad thing is very strange. So I need to sell you on this idea because it is an odd idea. But what it effectively is a chain of events that happens that causes a problem. So what happens with deflation is deflation occurs. Okay. So again, prices go down. Some buyers feel bad because they bought a, that's not bad, felt bad because they bought a product and then saw price go down. Let's actually do this with it to make it easier. Okay. So imagine you buy something and then a week later, like, oh, it went down like $5. I should have waited. Okay. Then what happens? Some of these buyers will wait longer next time to buy a product, right? In case it drops. So basically you become a little shy, right? The last time I bought a product, it actually went down in price next week. So the next time I go to buy a product, maybe I'm a little more cautious. What this ends up leading to is economy slows down as people take longer to make purchases. And then what happens then is when it slows down, what happens? Prices continue to fall. The whole cycle starts again. This creates basically this, like, we call it deflation spiral, where you wait on prices to drop, so it slows down the economy, so prices drop. And then you're like, oh, see, I was right. Prices did drop. So what do? You wait. Economy slows down even further. What happens? Prices drop. You're like, I'm so right. And you just continually wait it out, and you get this downward spiral of price that is weirdly difficult to escape. Okay, is not something you can escape easily. Japan had a huge problem with this back in the 90s. My timing might be off on that. But deflation is very scary. All right. With that being said, that's going to wrap up for today. Again, this was more of a general overview of the story of inflation. What we're going to do next video is get into more of the specifics, especially around how we measure inflation, price levels, and then look at a real numerical example to see how it's done. With that being said, take care. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Well, folks, that wraps up another lesson for today. I hope it was helpful. If you found the video valuable, please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions about the content or requests for other topics or subjects you'd like me to cover, please leave a comment below. Until next time, keep learning and make it easy.